Hi, this is Engage in New York, Module 4, Lesson 17. This is our fluency prep. So go ahead and read the objective while I read it out loud. I can relate decimal and fraction multiplication. So putting it all together, if you will. So what we're going to start with is our fluency practice. And this little fluency practice is kind of reviewing lessons 13 through 16. So we're simply going through and multiplying. 1 times 1 is 1. 2 times 3 is 6. I'm pretty sure you're quite capable of doing this. So go ahead and try those out and come right back and check your work. All right. 1/6, 1/8, 1/10, 3/8, 2/4, which is really 1/2, 4/15, 9/20, 6/12, which is really 1/2, 6/24, which is really 1/4, 10/40, which is really 1/4, 4/15, 4/14, which is 2/7. All right, our next little bit of fluency here is to write fractions as a decimal. Working on writing fractions as a decimal and then decimals as a fraction. You should be getting a little bit quicker, stronger, faster at this. This is a review of lesson 17. This starts to prep you for the next lesson, but let's go ahead. I'm pretty sure you can do it. Come back and check your work in just a second. All right, let's check our work here. So 1/10 is 1/10, 8/10 is 8/10, 7/10 is 7/10, 2/10, 3/10. Now 10/10. So if you have 10 groups of 10, you get 1, right? Going back to what you knew way back when. Then 200s, 200s, 900s, 1500s, 700s, 1200s, 4500s. Then we have turning our decimal into a fraction, 300s, 900s, 1100s, 8700s, 6400s, 4000s. But this is where things can kind of get squirrely on you. This is 4000s, but it's also the same as 4/10, because technically you could get rid of this 0 right here and consider it 4/10, or it's 4000s. So sometimes I'll say things like, I think in lesson 16 or lesson 15, I said like 200s. Well, it's like 20 hundredths, but it's really 2/10. All right, so we're moving on to multiplying whole numbers by decimal. So multiplying a whole number by a decimal here. So 2 times 0.1 is really 2 copies of 0.1, right? So 2 copies of 0.1 is what? 0.2, right? Because 0.1 plus 0.1 would be 0.2, right? So what is 2 copies of 1/10? So 2 copies of 1/10 would be 2/10, right? Would be 2/10, which is 0.2. So then we have, what is 3 copies of 1/10? 3 copies of 1/10, the word would be 3/10, which is the same as 0.3, right? Then we have 4 copies of 1/10. 4 copies of 1/10 would be 4/10, right? And 4/10 in a decimal is 0.4. Now, moving on. 7 times 0.7. Well, 7 times 0.7 is really, remember, it's repeated addition. So 0.1 plus 0.1 plus 0.1 plus 0.1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is 0.7. So 7 times 0.1 is 0.7. Then we have, what is 7 copies of 1/100th? So would be 7 hundredths, right? 7 hundredths is equal to 0.07. What is 5 copies of 1/100th? What do you think? 5 hundredths, right? So the equation would be 5 times 1/100 is 5 hundredths, right? All right. So from here, I want you to give me the decimal. 9 copies, 2 copies, 20 copies, 20 copies of hundredths, 30 copies, 30 copies, 80 copies, 80 copies. So I want you to give me the decimals for these, and I want you to come back and check your work. Okay, let's go through and check our work. So 9 copies of 0.01. So 9 copies of 1/100th. So 9 over 100, right, would be 9 hundredths. So here's 0.09. 30 copies of 1/10. So if you had 30 copies over 10, that would equal 3, right? Then we have 2 copies of 2/10. Then we have 30 copies of 0.03, which would be 3/10 or 30 hundredths. Then we have 20 copies of 0.1, which is 20 hundredths or 2/10. Then we have 80 times 0.01 is 8/10. Now, also remember what you know about multiplying decimals. Whole numbers by decimals of tens, hundreds, and thousands, right? We move the decimal. So remember, we move the decimal twice. So remember, the decimal sits here. We move it once, twice. We move the decimal once, twice. We move the decimal once, right? So it's 8. We move the decimal twice, 1, 2. Just reminding you of what you already know. You already know about moving the decimal when you're multiplying by a whole number by tenths, hundreds, or thousands. So 83 times 0.1. Here's our decimal we start off with. Move the decimal once. Or you can think of it as 83 times 1/10. Then we have 83 times 0.01, which is 0.83. So we start here, move it once, twice. Here we have 53. We're going to move it once, twice, because there are 2 numbers behind the decimal, right? We have 1 number behind the decimal. We're going to move our decimal once, 5.3. Then we have 64 times 0.01. We have our decimal here. We move it once, twice, 0.64. We have 37 times 1/10. We have 37 copies of 1/10. And we have 1 number behind the decimal. So that means our answer is going to have 1 number behind the decimal. If we have 2 numbers behind the decimal, we're going to have 2 numbers behind the decimal in our answer. All right, let's take on that application problem. And our application problem is going to review our past lessons that we've been doing, working on using that additional tape diagram, like pulling that tape diagram down. So we have Miss Casey grades 4 tests during her lunch. She grades 1/3 of the remainder after school. So she grades 4 tests during her lunch. So take those off the table. Then she grades 1/3 of the remainder. How much are you going to cut that remainder into after school? If she still has 16 tests to grade after school, how many tests are there? Use a tape diagram. All right. So this application problem is a review of lesson 16, the work with tape diagrams. This is a challenging problem in that the value of a part is given and then the value of 2/3 of the remaining. So it's probably a good idea. It says to use a tape diagram. I highly recommend you using a tape diagram. Come back and check your work. So this is your test. Can you attempt this problem? Can you draw it out? What can you solve? So can you find out how many tests there are altogether? If you can solve this, you are so far ahead of the curve. You are so ready for the end of this module. All right, come back and check your work. Okay, let's take a look at the problem. So we know there are 4 tests during lunch. Then she grades 1/3 of the remainder after school. After school, if she still has 16 tests to grade after school, how many tests are there? So here are all the tests. We just don't know how many there are altogether. So we know these are the total amount of tests, and she grades 4. So we have to take those off. And then we take down the remainder, and she grades 1/3 of it after school. So let's take off that 1/3, and we're left with 2 units left. But we know if she still has 16 tests to grade after school, we know that these 2 units have to equal 16. So if 2 units equal 16, then 16 units is equal to 16. Let's cross cancel here and divide. 1 unit is equal to 8. So we know that each unit here is equal to 8, right? So 8 times 3, 1, 2, 3 is equal to 24. Now let's go back and push this back up. So if this is equal to 24, it's 24 plus 4, which is equal to 28 tests. So here's 24 plus the 4 at lunch is 28 tests. There are 28 tests. All right, hopefully this is getting a little bit easier for you and you're really getting the hang of it. This is going to do it for our fluency. Join me. Come on back for module 4, lesson 17, our concept development.